Have you ever had one of those situations where you wanted something really badly, and it was just maybe quite out of reach and you couldn't quite get it? Or maybe you felt like you were just too late to get up and give a speech. Or maybe it was one of those situations where you were just too tired to even try. Well, I'm here today to share with you some life planning experiences to help you understand that it's not too late to get what you want. I'm going to share with you 6 key principles that I know work in life planning. I have a workbook that I want you to actually play with and experience as well. It was done on a high-quality printer, as you will quickly see. And I want you to interact. I want this to be a learning experience, because I am completely convinced that learning happens 2 ways. Yes, I learn as a teacher when I have you as students provide me feedback. And I hope that it goes 2 ways, that I, as the teacher, convey something that sparks you to action. Many of you know that my wife has cystic fibrosis. And in 2012, her doctors felt like it was time for a lung transplant. Well, Duke University happens to be the #1 facility for lung transplants. Since 1992, when they performed their first lung transplant, since then they have transplanted more lungs than any other facility in the world. And their statistics for survival are some of the highest in the industry. So when Sherry and I went to Duke University for her evaluation, it was a learning experience. Our first meeting with the transplant coordinator was in a room about this size right here. In the middle was this huge, monstrous boardroom table. We were meeting in the Duke University Medical Center boardroom. There were 6 couples there for evaluation. I sat on this side with my wife. Next to me was a heavy-set black guy in a wheelchair with 2 tanks of oxygen behind him. His son was next to him, and as you went around the table, I remember thinking, wow, does Sherry really need a transplant? That lady, she needs one. Yeah, he kind of needs one too. Yep. The guy next to me? Definitely. It made me wonder, well, what are we going to learn here? As the coordinator started telling us about all of the tests and prods and pricks and blood draws and everything else, colonoscopies, bronchoscopies, and the 100 other oscopies that were going to happen that week, she told us about the next test that they would do that morning would be a 6-minute walk. I thought, 6-minute walk, that's nothing. She started to continue on talking about other things, and all of a sudden, the black guy next to me raised his hand and said, in one of those raspy and breathy voices, What if you can't? The coordinator looked and said, Jim, what do you mean? What if you can't walk? The coordinator, in kind of a loving way, but in a very direct gaze towards him, said, Jim, a lung transplant is a physically intense experience. And if you can't be prepared physically, you're going to die on the operating table. I had turned to Jim, waiting to hear his response. And the only response was a tear that formed in the corner of his eye and started to drag down his cheek. It was at that point that I realized that Jim believed that it was too late. We didn't see Jim ever again. And for him, it was too late because he had given up. I can tell you from my own personal experience that giving up is when it's too late. And if you don't give up, then it's never too late. Oftentimes in our lives, we'll experience things that we want. And we'll set goals. Maybe you did that for New Year's, right? How many set goals for New Year's? New Year's resolutions. Those are the same thing as goals, aren't they? How many of you set goals? And those of you that kind of, well, sort of?
It wasn't New Year's.
It wasn't New Year's, but I contend that every day you set goals. For example, who went to the grocery store recently? Did you have a goal?
Really? Longer name, please.
No, that was your execution plan. Right? You had to go, you were there for some reason. Most of us go to grocery stores to get food, right? And that food is to supply a need. Well, I believe that goals are very powerful and that they can actually lead to tragedy if you're not careful. Tragedy in a grocery store, that's they're out of latte juice, or whatever. It's something like that. But in our lives, I believe that if we don't plan, that we can often find ourselves getting what we want and not wanting. So today, we're going to talk about getting what you want. On your first page, there is a list of 6 key principles. I'm going to share them with you right now, so write them down. My 5 key ingredients are imagination. Number 2 is values. Number 3 is plan. Number 4 is execution. Number 5 is adjust. And number 6 is people. You see, I believe the first thing to getting what you want in life is actually dreaming about it, is using your imagination. And the more successful you are in taking that dream or that goal, that whatever you imagine in your brain, the more you include the senses, the more powerful it is. One evening, one of my neighbors knocked on my door. He said, "Rheid, you got a minute?" I said, "Sure. I'd like to share something with you." It was about 8 o'clock. He came in, he went to my office, sat down and started talking about an idea that he had. He is a marketing guru. I am a computer guru, and he needed computer guru stuff for his marketing idea. The more we talked, the more I got interested. About 1:30, we agreed that we were going to go into business and that we were going to create a company that would do amazing things for people. Just before he left, he shook my hand and he said, "Rheid, we've got to come up with something that is going to drive us to work all night and to work extra hard hours to make this work." He says, "I have an idea. We both need front yards. we have a dirt pole in our front yard. How about we make our goal of getting lawn? He said, that's a good goal. And so I worked, and he worked, and we worked late. Worked late into the morning, got up after a short nap, went to work, came back and worked more. We kicked that company off. And in the second month, we grossed $100,000 in sales. 6 months later, we grossed $350,000 in sales. My neighbor put his lawn in. When I walked into his office one morning, I found a new little picture on his desk. It used to be a picture of his house without any lawn. This picture was a sleek Nighthawk motorcycle. He says, isn't it sexy? Won't I look great on it? Can you see me going down the road? I said, yeah, I can. 2 months later, that Nighthawk was parked out front of the office when I arrived one morning. It's amazing the power that you can get from setting goals. So I want you to think about something here for just a minute. What is it that you dream about? Here's a little place for you to write down some of those things that you dream about. What are some of your goals? Not just that goal of going to the grocery store. Take just a minute and think about it. What does it look like when you have it? Can you smell it? Is it something you can smell? Does it feel like something? Or where are you at when you have accomplished that goal? Those are ways that you can actually bring things into your mind to help you grasp hold and keep that goal in mind. The more they become real to you in your subconscious, the more your mind will actually work on them. Napoleon Hill once said, man's only limitation within reason lies in his development and use of his imagination. Now, I believe that completely. In 1985, I was sitting in the snow at the top of this cavern that they call fun. I was sitting on my butt with my feet strapped to a snowboard. My son had got me there somehow, and I was trying to envision, how am I going to go down this thing they call a super pipe and survive? I was trying, honestly, I was trying to envision myself doing what those ski jumpers do in the Olympics, where they close their eyes and you see them up there and doing this and, you know, speed, pump, jump, do all this, twist, turn, and stick the landing. I can tell you the only thing that I could imagine was a toboggan ride because of my own stupidity and maybe even because of paramedics coming, the ski patrol. The guy next to me noticed that I had been sitting a long time, I think. Says, dude, When you gonna go? I said, soon. My butt's frozen. He says, well, what you gonna do? And I said, I have no clue. What are you going to do? Oh, maybe a McTwisty, maybe a 720 backside. Then I watched this kid hop up and run down and do this amazing run, and all those things he said he did. I could only envision myself in that toboggan. So I did the safest thing. I just shot down through the middle of it and headed to the lodge. Because I had envisioned my ultimate demise of being in that toboggan, and I didn't want to do that. So that's why I believe what Napoleon Hill said about within reason. But your imagination can do good things and bad things. But it's until you dream that you actually have a goal. And once you solidify that and make that part of your subconscious, is when you'll actually see the success. So that's imagination, right? It's really about what you dream about. The second item that's on your list is about values. And why are values important? Well, I can tell you that that company that was called Food Connection, and this is its first label, was an amazing experience and an education and goals. But you know, after 10 months, the accountant came to me and he said, Reed, do you know that we're not going to have enough cash to pay our payroll this round? What? We're bringing in $400,000 a month in gross sales and we can't make payroll? What's up? Unbeknownst to me, I'm the computer guy. I had not paid attention so much to what was going on accounting-wise and how we were spending things. I was helping set goals, though, and our goal was growth. Well, in that process, we made commitments to inventory that wasn't moving. We had to invest in delivery mechanisms and in contracts with other companies that wanted upfront cash because we were such a new company. And we found ourselves being cash poor. We had plenty of inventory and everything else to ship, but we could not make our payroll. I had found that our goals had actually led us down the path and the near brink of crashing our company, of bankruptcy. So goals are very powerful. That's where values come into play. What you value is what should keep your goals and your actions in line. Oftentimes it's real easy when things are good to forget about that goal. Yeah, I'm getting there, but you know, I'm going to go over here and buy a Nighthawk. Or I'm going to go to Hawaii and try to promote the company. Values are very important. In 1950, East Germany was created. The DDR was established. And the propaganda that was made to everyone in the world was that we're putting up these walls because everyone is going to want to live in our socialist state. Well, between 1950 and 1961, when the Berlin Wall started going up, 3.5 million people escaped. They didn't want to be there. But once the wall went up, it became very difficult. And in fact, there was an order that was given to shoot anyone that was trying to escape. That led to hundreds of attempts by people, thousands of attempts, I should say more than hundreds, of trying to escape East Germany. They came up with the most amazing plans. One, for example, was they created compartments in a car where they could hide people and they wouldn't be noticed. Another, one of my favorites, was 2 surfboards, and they hollowed out so a person could lay down, and they went through the border horizontally. One of the most amazing ones, though, happened in 1963 when 13 people escaped, 11 children. They were hidden under the carcasses of pigs in a frozen produce truck. Now, what is it that drove those people to risk their lives to get out of East Germany? They valued freedom. Many of them, their families, were on 2 sides of the wall, and they valued their families. And so they risked everything to get out. That leads us to the next little segment here about planning. Sometimes we dream, and then we don't set up a plan. Our grocery experience of just wandering the aisles. None of us do that, do we? How many of your shopping carts come back with things that, how in the heck did that get in there? Yeah, me too. For us, plans don't have to be written. If you think about it, your goal of getting food is really planned in your brain. I'm going to drive down the street, go over and hit King Supers, right? And I know somewhere in that store I'm going to find a dozen eggs and a Snickers bar. So you have a plan, and you kind of built it automatically. And you started dreaming about having, well, I'm going to have that Snickers bar, right? Or maybe it was pink donuts as you walked in, the smell from the bakery, right? All of those are kind of immediate plans that happen in our brain. But life, we can't just leave it that way. Sometimes we'll get off in the weeds. And we'll find ourselves in places that we don't really want to be. "25 years ago, I had an experience of going to a conference where I sat and listened to an amazing speaker talk about his life as a network engineer. I was a network engineer. He talked about traveling to Hong Kong, to India, to Taiwan, to Europe, to Italy, and all other different places. And I was just mesmerized. And I said, that is what I want to be. So I studied, and I worked at it so hard for the next 2 to 3 years until I found myself getting onto a plane just 18 hours after I got off that plane, and I thought, I got what I wanted, but I don't want it anymore. That's when I realized that I had failed to create a balanced plan. That's what we're going to talk about next, is how do we balance a plan? We know that goals will actually drive us to do things. We can accomplish things even more so more so if we have a plan than if not. In fact, Winston Churchill says, those who plan do better than those who do not plan, even though they rarely stick to their plan. Has that ever happened to you? You ever create a plan and then it kind of goes awry and you think, well, I blew that. Guess it's too late. I'll just go ahead and eat some more cake. None of us set diet goals, right? Well, for me, after that experience, I heard this little voice in my head that came from Stephen Covey. And he said that if we're not careful, we will often find that our ladder of success is leaning on the wrong building. And that's where I was at. So what I want to share with you in the next few minutes is a success plan that I used to help put balance back into my life. We talked about how important values are. That's one of the first things that you need to do, is assess what's important. I came up with 7 categories of areas that I think are important to understand your values. And you have a list there that has 1 through 7, and I'm going to share that with you. Number 1 is spiritual. I believe that God created me spiritually before I got here. And everything has a spiritual element to it. And so it's important to understand what you value spiritually. Even if you might not believe. There's something that transpires in your head that you can't explain. But that subconscious still works. My father was a hospital administrator when I was growing up. And he found out that there were abortions being done illegally in his hospital. And he brought back some of the material after we hadn't seen him for months because he was involved in all of these trials and different activities. And he showed me a picture of a surgeon holding 2 little feet in his fingers. He says it's amazing that there's not a spirit there once it's dead. But when does that spirit happen? So spiritual things are of value to me. So I use that as number 1. Number 2 is family. Family is very important to me as well. I've learned so much from them, and I continue to experience some amazing things from them. Number 3 is physical. What do you value that drives you to diet? Is it because you physically don't feel well? Do you value your health? Number 4 is financial. I personally like money. Hope you do too. It's pretty miserable without it. 5, intellectual. Number 6 is professional. 7 is social. Once you've identified values, those should guide those goals or those dreams that you really want to pursue. Now, I'm not like that. I have a hard time, even from grade school. My teachers didn't think that I valued education because I daydreamed so much. But we often dream before we think about our values, right? So in my case, I usually dream about those things or set goals first, and then I come back and go, well, does that match my value? Well, maybe not. But we do that every day. Why do you go to work? Have you written down why you value going to work? No, not necessarily. Did you write out a plan why you work? What gets you out of bed and to work every day? You value something there, right? So none of you pay rent? None of you have a mortgage?
I value the commitment I've made to my customers.
Okay, and that's a value
is that just value my paycheck?
That's a value.
I value staying married.
That's a value. For me, I value the insurance that my employer covers. Because I've paid all of it before. And $1,500 a month, you've got to make a lot of sales to keep that going. So once you know your values, then you can start talking about your goals. Now, this is where kind of the balance comes into play. If you take those categories and you establish goals, specific lifetime goals for that, that gets you somewhere way out there. And it's kind of fuzzy, isn't it? Some cases, yeah, I can see it a little bit closer. But I like to focus on things that are even closer than that. So I look at 5 years and 2 years. So you have a little graph there that you can use to fill out to look at your own goals. From a perspective of what you value, what is it that you really want in life? If you look at the short-term, long-term goals, there's additions to that. What is it that you really want? How will you know when you got it? And the kicker that's always there for goals is when. And the more specific and more precise, the more effective that's going to be, because that's going to set in motion some actions within your brain. Now that's the planning phase. This next little section actually oftentimes gets criticized as being, well, that's not planning, that's actually execution. If you look at the section on activities, what are you going to do, now focusing just on what you want in 2 years, what are you going to do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, or a quarterly basis? What is it that's going to help you be successful? This is part of that plan. Well, you know, I value entertaining and teaching people, so I want to be a professional speaker. So one of my daily activities is to get up at 5:30 in the morning and practice and prepare. Now you might think, well, that's an activity now. Well, yes, it is, but it's part of your plan. Does that happen every single day at my house? Nope. It doesn't. But things change and transpire. But execution comes into play when you take that plan and start putting meat behind it. Now, as a young boy, I had the luxury of living close to my grandparents. And my grandfather was a biochemist. When he retired, he lived in his overalls. White shirt, and oftentimes you'd catch him with a tie. It was just part of his experience all of his life that he continued to put a tie on every day. One day I came through the front door. Hey, Grandma, hey, Grandpa. But Grandpa wasn't in his office, in his typical sitting and reading, well, kind of sleeping mode. I found him in the basement, and he was building toys. And I got excited, so I picked up his hammer and said, "Can I help?" And he said, "Well, you need to practice a little bit." So he put down a little board, gave me some 8-penny nails, and I proceeded to bend and shoot them all over the room. He taught me how to bend them straight and to nail them in straight after you bent them. And after I got to a point that I was close to thinking that it was time that I could help, he gave me nails that he was using on his toys. gave me a few of them, and before I could see that he turned around, and before he turned back, I jumped around, bounced around. I know he was laughing. But as he turned around, he said, "This one won't hit your thumb as many times as the other one." So I proceeded to practice. There is a time for the right tool, and this time of execution is one of those areas that you can get completely overboard. How many of you created a list the last time you went on a vacation? How many of you do go on vacations? Most of us create some list of those things that we want to remember, or we've got it already in our head, but we often forget things. At least that's my case. They say it's growing old. It is a proven fact. You'll get more done if you create a list and you check those things off your list. Well, I can tell you in my case, I wanted the right tool. And sometimes you need a little hammer to do little things. Sometimes you need a big hammer. And sometimes you really need hammers. Big hammers, the big guns, you know? Well, I can tell you, this is not one of those times. But you can do whatever you would like. You don't need Microsoft Project to coordinate your activities going to the grocery store. Right? A simple little 3x5 card with your list on it will work fine. Well, in my case, I found, and I'm a list person, I found that I would often create my list and it would be prioritized automatically. The things at the top were the things that I must get done. But I found that in my life, I was only getting the must done, and I'd never get down to the things that I wanted to get done. So taking some feedback from the Stephen Coveys, the Bill Maxwells, and others that have gone before me, I created my own super list. And I categorize my list now based on must, shoulds, and wants. What are things that you must get done?
Buy groceries.
Buy groceries.
Pay the bill.
Go to work.
Eat.
Shower.
Those are must things, but would you put them on your list?
No.
That's just so I can check something.
Yes, so you can check them out. I like that too.
I like that. What do you think brush teeth is on the list?
So one of the things that I use to categorize and to qualify something as a must is that it has a date. A date and time that it needs to be done. How many of you knew the date of a research paper that you were supposed to hand in college, and it was way out there? And you never worked on it until the week before? Okay, the week before, the night before, more like it. So a must is one of those things that I say is time-bound. And it has to be relevant, though. Is it time-bound for this week? If it is, then it goes on my must column. If it's not, then I put it as a should. All of the things that I want to do, I put in my want column. Now, why would I do that?
Make sure you occasionally do something you want.
I can do that with my list. Well, here's the power of my super list. As you take all of those must, shoulds, and wants, then you prioritize them. That puts my number one want in line with the number one must. And so I then do what Covey says we need to do, is not prioritize our priorities, it's actually schedule our priorities. So I take my list and I take my priorities and I put them to a calendar, like what you have in your handout. And I start with each number one. And I figure out where in the week I'm going to spend time to get that one done. Then I moved back to number 2s, and I put my must, shoulds, and wants for number 2 on that list. That ensures that I always get what I want. Now you might think that's simple. Well, it is. And you could do it 100 other different ways, but for me, I found that it worked. In 2005, I sat on a park bench and contemplated how I was going to go back to school to finish something that I started 20 years ago. That was getting my degree. I had worked for many big companies. I'd been working for HP for almost 2 years. And I did not have a degree. I had 15 certificates that showed that I could do things that they wanted to be done, and I showed them by my actions. But I didn't have that degree, and it gnawed on me. This right here are must, should, want lists and calendars until I finished my degree. And here's proof that it actually happened, because my dream of walking across the stage and getting that diploma, even though I thought it could be there and it was kind of fuzzy in 2005, in 2008 it became a reality. And that must, shoulds, and wants helped me balance my family, my work, some advanced experiences that I was having with my church, and my wife stayed with me. It was proof enough to me that taught me that I can get what I want. The last element on your list is people. And I could quickly just say that, there were days that I didn't want to study. I didn't want to finish up and finish my assignments and hand in my assignments, but my wife was there and said, "Go on, lock yourself in your room. It's time to work." What an amazing help she was. To wrap this up, let me share with you something that goes back to where I started. That experience at Duke University taught me a lot about lung transplants. Duke has an amazing facility, people, staff. They have a process that's proven, that they reevaluate and they modify and change because it needs, life changes for us. It happens. And so we need to be flexible enough to make sure that that happens. But there's a real element where people help you get there. Cheryl, when I first saw her, I thought she was in her early 70s. She was at what they call the Center for Living. That's the physical therapy place for Duke lung transplant patients. When I saw her, she was walking around the track, and she was making 2 laps in 20 minutes. She needed lots of oxygen. She was supported by kind of a walker that had wheels. Cheryl had come to the program 10 months before Sherry and I had gone to the evaluation. And she was like Jim. She was in a wheelchair, hadn't been out of it for almost a year. She'd been sent home to live on hospice to die. A doctor told her if she would stop smoking for 6 months, he would recommend her for an evaluation. And somewhere she mustered up the courage to stop. Grandkids are an amazing driving force. Her children, children sometimes are an irritant. But she quit. She went to the evaluation and they said, "Sorry, we won't evaluate you until you can prove that you are physically ready for this." Her dad reminds you of an old backwoods guy, just one of the most polite people, wheeled her up to the Center for Living that first day. And the PT guy stopped him right there and said, "Wheelchairs aren't allowed in this facility. If you want it, you've got to walk in." With the assistance of her dad, he walked her in, sat down, and they had set up chairs around the track. And they said, "This is our first step. Move from chair to chair and see how far you can go every day. You'll need to do stretches, you'll need to do weights, you'll need to do riding a bike, all of those things like everybody else. And once you get to the point that you qualify, then we will reevaluate you." When Sherry and I left, 2 months after meeting her, she was at a point where she almost gave up. I credit Sherry for most of that, keeping her there, but I know it was part of her family and that conscious thing in her mind, that vision of living. A year later, she qualified. They evaluated, and 7 days later, she had her lung transplant. What is amazing to me is that Sherry and I got to see her just a few months ago. That's when I realized that she is my age. Her transplant transformed her, and it changed her life. All because of the support of those people around her. Yes, they changed her plan every day. All of that came into play. Yes, she had a goal. She had to envision it, because a lung transplant is intense. But I can tell you that it's not too late to get what you want. Thank you.
And timer, can we have 1 minute on the clock so we can have our evaluation?